The dust was not just on the ground, it lived in the air. It coated her tongue, gritted between her teeth, and settled in a fine, stinging layer on her cracked lips. Lorna had been walking for 3 days since the last wagon left her by the trail, its driver refusing to go further into the bleak expanse of the Wyoming Territory. She had walked until the soles of her fine eastern shoes, never meant for such terrain, had worn through to the thin leather beneath. Now, every step was a careful agony, her feet wrapped in rags torn from her petticoat. She carried a small, velvet satchel, its clasp broken, holding nothing but a spare chemise and a silver locket she dared not open. Her dress, a dark wool travel suit, was ripped at the hem and stained with alkali and sweat. A bruise, the color of a dying plum, spread from her temple into her hairline, hidden only by the fall of her dirty, matted hair. She was a creature of the East, broken and dropped into a land that did not care. Ahead, the town finally rose from the flat brown plain. It was not a town so much as a collection of wounds on the earth, a few dozen wooden buildings, most unpainted, huddled together as if for warmth against the constant, scouring wind. A wide, rutted street of dirt served as its main artery. There was no green, no softness, only splintered wood, hard-packed earth, and the immense, indifferent sky stretching for 1,000 miles in every direction. She stumbled on the raised boardwalk in front of a building whose sign, hanging by one hinge, declared it the Prairie Rest Inn. It looked one strong gust away from collapsing. This was where she would stop. She could not walk another mile. Her flight had taken everything from her, her money, her pride, her name. The man she fled, the one with the respectable name and the iron fists, had ensured she would have nowhere to turn. She had hoped to disappear. This place felt like the end of the world. It felt like a good place for disappearing. She pushed the door open. The common room was dim, smelling of stale beer, old smoke, and boiled cabbage. A woman, old and straight-backed as a rifle, stood behind a rough-hewn counter, wiping it with a gray rag. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes missed nothing. Lorna's voice was a dry croak. "Ma'am, I need a room." The widow, whose name Lorna would learn was Mrs. Albright, looked her up and down. She saw the torn dress, the exhausted pallor, the terror swimming just beneath the surface. "A room is 2 bits a night, payable in advance." Lorna's hand went to her empty pocket. The shame burned her throat. "I have no money, ma'am." Her eyes dropped to the floorboards. "But I can work, I can clean, I can cook, I'm strong." It was a lie. She felt as fragile as spun glass. "Mrs." Albright was silent for a long moment. The only sound, the whistle of the wind through the doorframe. "Kitchen help's always short," the old woman said at last, her voice not unkind, but brittle as frost. "You'll sleep in the attic room. It's small. You'll work from before sunup till I say you're done. You'll eat what's left after the boarders are fed. And you'll cause no trouble." "No, ma'am," Lorna whispered, relief so sharp it made her dizzy. No trouble. The room was hardly a room at all. It was a slant-roofed space under the eaves, containing a narrow cot, a wooden crate for a table, and a cracked porcelain pitcher and bowl. There was no lock, only a wooden bar she could drop into a bracket. The moment she did, sliding it into place, her legs gave out. She sank onto the thin, straw-stuffed mattress and did not cry. The tears were frozen inside her. Same as everything else. She had made it. She was alive, and she was, for this one night, safe. That was all she could manage to feel. Downstairs, the kitchen was a hot, greasy cave. For the next week, Lorna lived within its walls. She peeled potatoes until her hands were raw, scrubbed iron pots with lye soap that bit into her skin, and washed glasses until her back felt it would snap in two. She did it all in a silent fog. Wyatt first saw her on a Tuesday. He was unloading feed for Mrs. Albright, hoisting the 100-pound sacks onto his shoulder with an economy of motion that spoke of long-practiced strength. He was not a big man, but he was solid, built of muscle and quiet resolve. He moved with a purpose, his worn hat pulled low, his eyes on his work. He lived on a small spread a few miles out, breaking horses and running a few head of cattle. He kept to himself. The town left him be, and that suited him. Lorna came out the back kitchen door, shaking a dusty rug. She did not see him. The wind caught her hair, whipping it across her face. She looked, he thought, like a bird with a broken wing, something small and startled. He set the last sack down and brushed the dust from his vest. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was just a simple greeting. Lorna's reaction was violent. She did not just startle, she recoiled as if struck. A small, choked sound tore from her throat, and the rug fell from her hands. Her entire body tensed, her hands flying up to cover her face, her shoulders hunching. She was bracing for a blow. Wyatt froze, his hands raising slowly, palms out. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice soft. "Just saying hello." She wouldn't look at him. Her eyes, wide and frantic, darted to the left and right, looking for an escape, looking for the source of a threat he had no intention of being. She was trembling so hard he could see it from 10 feet away. A cold understanding settled on him. He had seen fear in horses, but this was different. This was deeper. A fear that had been carved into her. He gave a slow nod. Not to her, but to the air between them. He turned his back to her deliberately, slowly, and walked to his wagon. He busied himself checking a harness, giving her time to retreat. When he heard the kitchen door slam shut, he looked back. The rug lay in the dust where she had dropped it. He picked it up, folded it, and set it on the porch rail before climbing into his wagon and driving away. Lorna did not emerge from the kitchen for the rest of the day. Her life settled into a grim rhythm, measured by the rising sun she saw from the kitchen window and the moon she saw from her attic slit. She avoided the common room at all costs, especially when the men were in for their supper. She would leave the plates on a sideboard for Mrs. Albright to serve, hiding in the steam of the scullery. When she did have to cross the room, she kept her eyes welded to the floor, her body curved inward, making herself as small as possible. The sound of a man's laughter made her jump, and a chair scraping on the floor was enough to make her drop a plate. Mrs. Albright watched her with sharp, assessing eyes. She saw the girl barely ate, pushing the leftover stew around her plate until it was cold. She heard her, late at night, walking the floor in the attic room above her own. And she saw the tremors. Sometimes Lorna's hands would shake so badly she couldn't hold a potato knife. She would grip her own wrists, her knuckles white, her breath held tight until the spell passed. The land around them offered no comfort. It was a place of harsh truths. The wind never stopped. It howled down from the mountains, a high, lonely sound that rattled the window panes and made the inn sign creak on its single hinge. It carried the scent of dust and, in the distance, the smell of juniper and cold stone. Sunsets were not gentle. They were a violent spectacle of blood orange and deep purple, spilling across the sky before the dark fell like a hammer, bringing a cold that seeped into the bones. Beyond the last building, the prairie stretched into an emptiness so vast it made a person feel small and temporary. It was a land of long miles and long silences, a place that could swallow a person whole. Wyatt knew those silences well. They were his only companions most days. He was a man made of quiet capability. He could mend a broken axle, set a splint on a horse's leg, and track a stray calf for 2 days across hardpan. His cabin was sparse but clean, his movements deliberate. But beneath the capable surface, Wyatt was burdened. He carried a guilt that sat on his chest like a stone, a private grief that never eased. He had come west with his younger brother, Amos, full of talk about owning their own land. Amos was 18, loud, and full of a young man's foolish pride. They had filed a claim on a piece of land by a creek. Another rancher, a man named Hatcher, claimed their creek was his boundary line. It was a dispute over a few acres of scrub and water. It should have been settled by a surveyor, but Hatcher brought men, and Amos brought his rifle. Wyatt saw it happen in his mind every night. He saw himself standing between them, his hands up, trying to talk sense into Hatcher, trying to tell Amos to stand down. But the words had been useless. A shove, a curse, and then Amos, raising his rifle, a shot, then 3 more. Amos had fallen, his eyes wide with surprise, looking at Wyatt as the blood bloomed on his shirt. Wyatt had killed one of Hatcher's men, but it was too late. He had held his brother while the hot, dry wind blew dust over them, feeling the last, rattling breath leave his body. He had buried him on the land they had fought for, a piece of ground neither of them would ever truly own. The guilt was a constant companion. He should have been faster. He should have been smarter. He should have stopped it. The confrontation at the inn happened on a Saturday night. The common room was full, the air thick with smoke and the smell of whiskey. A trail crew had just been paid, and the men were loud. Lorna was forced to help, her face pale, her movements quick and bird-like as she cleared empty glasses. A big man with a red beard, drunk and belligerent, snagged her wrist as she passed. "Hey, girlie," he slurred, his grip tightening. "You ain't smiled once all night. What's wrong with you? Too good for us." Lorna froze. The tray of glasses clattered to the floor, shattering. She did not scream. She did not pull away. She went utterly, terrifyingly still, her eyes shutting tight, her body rigid, bracing for what always came next. The room went quiet, the men watching, some with mild interest, some with dark amusement. Wyatt had been sitting in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee, a rare trip to town for supplies he couldn't put off. He was on his feet before the last piece of glass had settled. He didn't rush. He walked calmly to the table. Let her go," he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the smoky air. The drunk man, Jed, squinted up at him. "Who the hell are you? This ain't your business. Cowboy." He gave Lorna's arm a vicious shake. "The little mouse needs to learn some manners." Wyatt's hand moved. It didn't strike. It landed on the man's shoulder, his fingers finding the nerves and sinew. He applied a calm, steady pressure. It was the grip he used to gentle a panicked horse, but with an iron strength behind it. "I said," he repeated, his voice flat. "Let her go." Jed's face purpled. He tried to shrug off the grip, but it was like being held by a blacksmith's vice. The pain was sharp and sudden. With a curse, he shoved Lorna away from him. She stumbled back, catching herself on a table. And then she was gone, fleeing into the darkness of the kitchen. Wyatt didn't release the man's shoulder. He held him for 1 more second, his eyes cold as the prairie night, locked on Jed's. "Pay for your drink," he said, "and get out. Don't come back." He let go. The man rubbed his shoulder, his drunken bravado gone, replaced by a sullen fear. He threw a few coins on the table and staggered out into the night, the room silent in his wake. Wyatt looked at the mess of broken glass. He put $1 on the counter for his coffee and to cover the damage, nodded to Mrs. Albright, and walked out. He didn't check on the girl. He knew his presence would be no comfort. Lorna was not in the kitchen. Mrs. Albright found her in the scullery, huddled on the floor between the water barrels and the sacks of flour. She was scrubbing at the floorboards with a rag, though nothing had been spilled there. Her whole body was shaking, a low animal sound of distress coming from her throat. "Child," Mrs. Albright said, her voice rough. "It's over. The man is gone." Lorna didn't look up. She kept scrubbing, her knuckles white. "He shouldn't have," she whispered, her voice raw. "That drunk? No, he shouldn't have put his hands on you. Scum like that. No?" Lorna's voice was sharp, desperate. "Him, the cowboy, Mr. Wyatt, he shouldn't have looked at me. He shouldn't have touched him." She rocked back on her heels, wrapping her arms around her knees. "It just makes it worse. It just reminds me." Mrs. Albright stood over her, a sudden, fierce pity tightening her chest. She reached down and put a hand on Lorna's shoulder. The girl flinched, but didn't pull away. "I just want to forget," Lorna whispered, the words a prayer of despair. I just want to forget everything." That night, Wyatt lay on his bunk in his cabin, his boots still on, his hands laced behind his head. The moon was high, casting sharp shadows across the wooden floor. He could smell the sagebrush on the night air, the same scent that had choked him as he held Amos. The look on that girl's face. Lorna. Mrs. Albright had called her. It wouldn't leave him. It was not gratitude he had seen. It was shame. It was the hollow-eyed look of an animal caught in a trap, one that had given up fighting and was just waiting for the end. He had stepped in to stop a brute, but he had only reminded her that men could be brutes. He had made himself part of her fear. He remembered the feeling of helplessness as he watched his brother bleed out onto the dry, worthless land. He had been strong. He had been capable, but he hadn't been able to save the one person who mattered. He had felt that same sickness in his gut tonight. He had stopped Jed, but he hadn't helped her. He had only been one more man in a world of men, proving that strength was the only thing that mattered. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The wind howled, a long, mournful cry that sounded just like the silence he lived in. The morning after the confrontation, Lorna half expected the drunkard, Jed, to return. She spent the day in the kitchen, her back rigid, starting at every footstep in the common room. But the man did not come back, and Wyatt, the man who had intervened, was gone. She felt a strange, hollow relief, but it was poisoned with shame. He had seen her. He had seen her freeze, seen her weakness. He had been forced to act, and in doing so, had drawn a circle of attention around her that she did not want. A few days later, she heard a sound from the yard. It was the clean, steady thunk of an axe splitting wood. She crept to the kitchen window, wiping steam from the glass. It was him, Wyatt. He was at Mrs. Albright's woodpile. He had not been asked. He was simply working, his hat pulled low, his shoulders moving with an easy, powerful rhythm. He was not looking at the inn. He seemed oblivious to it. He stacked the split logs into a neat, tight cord, his movements economical and sure. Lorna watched him for nearly an hour. She watched the way he tested the heft of a round before striking, the way he never wasted emotion. He was a man who understood work. When he finished, he simply gathered his axe, climbed onto his wagon, and left. He did not ask for payment. He did not ask for thanks. Lorna stared at the woodpile. It was stacked high enough to last 2 weeks. A few days after that, Mrs. Albright came in from the back porch carrying a small wooden crate. "Well, I'll be," the old woman muttered, setting it on the table. "Mr. Wyatt must have had a good week with his hens." The crate was filled with 24 brown and speckled eggs, resting in dried grass. They were perfect. Lorna touched one, its shell still faintly warm, as if it had just been gathered. She had been living on watery broth and leftover bread crusts. An egg was a luxury. "Go on," Mrs. Albright said, seeing the look on Lorna's face. "Cook one for yourself. I won't tell." Lorna did. She boiled it hard, peeled it, and ate it standing in the steam of the scullery, the salt she sprinkled on it mixing with the sudden, hot tears she could not control. It was just an egg, but it was the first pure, simple kindness she had received in over a year. The axe continued, always indirect, always silent. The back door to the kitchen had a broken latch, and the wind would catch it, making it slam shut with a sound like a gunshot that made Lorna drop whatever she was holding. She would come to work one morning to find the latch repaired. The hinge was oiled. The door now swung shut with a quiet, satisfying click. She began to watch for his wagon. She learned his schedule, Tuesdays and Fridays. He brought supplies. He would speak quietly with Mrs. Albright, settle his account, and leave. He never came into the kitchen. He never sought her out. When they did pass in the yard, he would give a slow nod, his eyes on the horizon, and keep walking. He was giving her space. He was treating her not like a victim, but like a wary animal, giving her room to breathe. And in that space, something other than fear began to grow. It was a fragile, aching curiosity. The walls of the inn, which had at first felt like a sanctuary, began to feel like her prison back east. The smell of boiled cabbage and old beer, the dim light of the common room, the suffocating smallness of her attic cot. It all began to choke her. She needed air. She needed to feel something, anything, other than the dull, heavy numbness that had become her only defense. She started to walk. She rose in the dark, hours before the sun, while the town was locked in a deep, cold sleep. She would slide the wooden bar on her door, her movements practiced and silent, and slip out the repaired back door. The cold was the first thing to greet her. It was a clean, sharp, biting cold that stole her breath and made her lungs burn. She welcomed it. It was a feeling. It was real. She walked out onto the prairie, her thin shawl clutched tight. She told Mrs. Albright she was gathering wild herbs, yarrow and sage, for the woman's remedies. It was only partly a lie. She did gather them, her fingers clumsy and numb in the dawn chill. But mostly, she walked. She walked until the tiny, huddled town was just a dark smudge behind her. She walked into the vast, open emptiness. There were no walls here. There were no locks. The sheer scale of the land was terrifying, but it was a different terror from the one she had known. This was the terror of insignificance. The land did not care about her shame, or the man who had beaten her. It simply was. She would stand and watch the sun rise, a brutal wash of orange and red that set the edges of the distant mountains on fire. She breathed in the cold, dry air, filling her lungs until they ached. She was trying to feel. She was trying to find a piece of herself that had not been touched, that had not been broken. But all she felt was the cold. One morning, the world was gone. A fog had rolled in during the night, a thick, wet, white blanket that swallowed the land. It was a prairie fog, silent and absolute. She should not have gone out. But the need to walk, the need to escape the attic room was stronger than her caution. She stepped off the porch and was instantly consumed. The inn disappeared behind her. The street was gone. The world was reduced to a 5-foot circle of swirling, damp gray. She could hear nothing but the sound of her own boots on the invisible dirt, and the frantic hammering of her own heart. She told herself she would just walk to the edge of town, to the creek bed, and back. She kept her head down, trying to follow the ruts of the wagon road, but the fog disoriented her. After 10 minutes, she stopped. She had no idea which way she was facing. The road was gone. "Hello?" she called out, her voice muffled, swallowed by the white. There was no answer. The panic came on fast, cold and sharp. The white, featureless walls of the fog closed in. It was the room. It was the room back east, the one they had locked her in, the one with the white walls and the high window. She was trapped. She could not see. She could not escape. She began to run. She stumbled over rocks, her breath catching in her throat. A high, thin sound of terror. "No!" she whimpered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Please, no!" She ran until her lungs burned, until she tripped over a piece of fallen sagebrush and fell hard onto the frozen, rocky ground. She stayed there, on her hands and knees, the breath sobbing out of her. She was lost. She would die out here, and no one would ever know. It was the same helplessness, the same crushing finality of her capture. Then, a new sound. The slow, steady clop of a horse's hooves, muffled by the fog. A shape emerged from the gray, a horse, and then the man sitting on it. Wyatt. He must have been checking his trap lines. He stopped the horse 10 feet away, looking down at her, his expression unreadable in the mist. "You're turned around, ma'am," he said, his voice calm, as if finding a woman weeping on the frozen ground was a common occurrence. "The town is that way." He pointed east. Lorna stared up at him, the solid, real shape of him in the swirling, dreamlike fog. And then, the dam of her numbness, the one she had so carefully constructed, the one she had been trying to break with the cold morning air. It shattered. It was not a gentle weeping. It was a raw, agonizing collapse. She curled into a ball on the ground, her hands covering her head, and she sobbed. She wept for the room, for the beatings, for the father who had sold her. She wept for the shame, and for the cold, and for the fact that she was so utterly, hopelessly lost, in every way a person could be. Wyatt dismounted. He stood still for a long time, just letting her cry. He did not move toward her. He did not offer words of comfort. He just stood witness, his presence a solid anchor in the disorienting white. When her sobs began to quiet, fading into dry, hitching gasps, he moved. She saw his boots step into her line of vision. He crouched, not too close. Then he undid the buttons of his heavy canvas coat. It was lined with wool, dark with wear and smelling of pine smoke, leather, and horse. He did not try to touch her. He simply held the coat out. When she didn't take it, he moved slowly, deliberately, and draped it over her shaking shoulders. The weight of it was a shock. It was heavy, and it was warm with his own body heat. It was the first human warmth she had felt in so long. She almost recoiled, but it was also a shield. She pulled it tighter, burying her face in the rough, warm wool. "Come on," he said, his voice low. He offered his gloved hand. She looked at it for a long moment. She did not want to be touched, but she also could not stand. She hesitated. Then, ignoring his hand, she reached out and grasped the thick leather of his chaps, using his leg as an anchor to pull herself to her feet. He accepted this without comment. He did not try to help her onto his horse. He just took the reins and began to walk. "Follow my steps," he said. She clutched the heavy coat around her and followed the dark shape of his back, putting her feet exactly where he had put his, all the way through the silent, white fog, until the dark, splintered shape of the inn emerged, and she was safe. That night, she could not stay in the attic. The walls were too close. After Mrs. Albright had retired and the common room was dark, Lorna slipped downstairs. She took his coat, which she had folded, and walked out onto the front porch. She sat on the top step, pulling her own thin shawl around her, leaving his coat on the bench. The air was cold, but clear. The stars were sharp, hard points of light in a black sky. She just needed to see the distance. She did not hear him arrive. She only sensed him. She turned, and he was there, standing at the bottom of the steps. He looked at the folded coat, then at her. He had come for it. I washed the mud from it," she whispered. He nodded. He did not take the coat. Instead, he walked past her and leaned against a porch post, 10 feet away, looking out at the dark, empty street. They sat in the silence for a long time. The wind whistled around the corner of the building. A piano played tinny music from the saloon down the street. He asked nothing. He did not ask why she was out in the cold. He did not ask about the fog, or why she had broken down. His silence was not empty. It was patient. It was a void, waiting to be filled. And the secrets she held, the ones that were poisoning her, they rose to fill it. "My father," she said, her voice so quiet it was barely a breath. He was a respected man. In Philadelphia, Wyatt did not turn. He kept his gaze on the street. He made bad investments, lost everything, our name, our house. He had debts. Lorna's hands twisted in her lap. There was a man, a friend of his, older, with money. He offered to settle my father's accounts. She stopped, swallowing against the dry sickness in her throat. "In exchange," she continued, her voice flat and dead. "For me, it was an engagement. I was the price. I was to be his wife." Wyatt remained perfectly still, a shadow against the post. "I refused," she said. "I told my father I would not. The man, my fiancé, he laughed. He said I had no choice. My father, he agreed. He said it was my duty. When I still refused, they locked me in my room for weeks to break my will. My father let him—" The words came faster now, tumbling out into the cold night air. "I tried to run. I got out the window, but he found me. He brought me back. He beat me." Her hand went to her temple, to the place the bruise had been. "He said he was teaching me teaching me what it meant to belong to him. He said I would never get away again, that he would find me wherever I went. She was shaking, the cold of the memory far worse than the cold of the night. I waited. I pretended to agree. I pretended to be obedient. I stole $20 from my father's desk, and I ran. I ran. I have been running ever since. The story was finished. It lay between them, ugly and bare. Lorna waited for the judgment, for the pity, for him to walk away. Wyatt pushed himself off the post. He did not walk away. He walked over and sat on the step below hers, not facing her, but next to her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. He looked out at the dark prairie, the same one she had been lost in that morning. "No man owns you," he said. His voice was low and rough, and held a certainty that vibrated through the wood of the porch. It was not an opinion. It was a law. They sat like that until the cold became unbearable. The fire in the common room grate was just glowing embers, but it was warmer than the porch. Lorna went inside, and he followed, carrying his coat. She stood by the hearth, warming her numb hands. He was there, on the other side of the stone fireplace. The tension in the room was a thick, heavy thing. She was intensely aware of him, his stillness, his strength. It was not a threat. It was a wall. It was the first wall she had ever seen that felt like protection, not a prison, but the fear, the muscle-deep habit of it, was still there. He moved to place his coat on a chair, a simple, harmless motion, and she flinched, taking a half-step back, her hands flying up before she could stop them. He froze. He saw the motion. He saw the terror that was always just beneath her skin. He slowly, deliberately, finished placing his coat, then turned back to the fire. He kept his distance. "I don't know how to be," she whispered, her confession not finished after all. She looked at her hands, pale and trembling in the dim red light of the embers. "I feel nothing. I am numb. I walk in the cold just to feel it sting. But inside, I am a ghost. I just want to forget. I want to forget all of it." Wyatt turned his head, his gaze meeting hers across the hearth. His eyes were dark, and they held a heat that had nothing to do with the fire. It was not anger. It was not pity. It was a fierce, focused intensity. "Forgetting is not living," he said, his voice rough. "It is just waiting to die." He took one step, then another, closing the distance between them. She did not back away. She held her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought he must hear it. He stopped, standing directly in front of her. He was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face. "You feel numb," he stated. It was not a question. He did not raise his hands. He did not move to touch her. He just held her with his gaze. "Then let me make you feel something," he said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to travel from his chest to hers. "Anything, anything that is yours." Her breath hitched. She stared into his eyes, searching for the trick, for the lie, for the demand that always followed a man's kindness. She found none. She saw only a reflection of her own pain, and a raw, steady honesty. He was not asking for anything. He was offering. He was offering a sensation, proof that she was not a ghost. The screaming in her mind told her to run, to bar the door, to hide her body, starved of comfort, of simple, safe contact, did something else. It was the smallest movement. She hesitated, her entire body trembling, caught between a lifetime of fear and a single moment of desperate need. Then, slowly, she leaned forward. She did not lift her hands. She did not try to kiss him. She simply leaned that last few inches and rested her forehead, then her cheek, against the solid, warm wall of his chest. She felt his muscles tense beneath her ear. He did not move. He did not embrace her. He just stood, solid as the mountains, letting her hold on. She closed her eyes. She could smell the pine smoke, the leather, and the clean scent of the cold air on his shirt. She could hear the slow, steady, powerful beat of his heart under her ear. It was the sound of life. It was real. And for the first time in more years than she could count, she felt safe. That night on the porch had changed nothing, And it had changed everything? Lorna still went to the kitchen before dawn. She still kept her eyes down. But when Wyatt's wagon pulled up, the silence between them was different. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but the shared silence of a secret. He was the only person alive who knew her past, and he had not run. He found her a few days later, watching his horses. She stood at the fence of his small corral, her hands gripping the top rail. He had 3 animals he was breaking for the army, wild-eyed geldings that snorted and paced, but she was watching the 4th, a dun mare, quiet and steady, with a gentle eye. Wyatt came to stand beside her, not close, just sharing the fence line. "That's Molly," he said. Lorna did not flinch. She had heard him approach, and the sound of his boots, the rhythm of his walk, was no longer a threat. "She's beautiful," Lorna whispered. She was afraid to speak too loud, as if the sound might break the spell. "She's steady," he replied. "Got more sense than most folks in town." Lorna's grip on the rail tightened. A memory, sharp and bright and painful, surfaced from the muddy depths of her numbness. A green field, a black mare, her hair flying free, a time before locked doors and iron fists. "I used to ride," she said, her voice so low he barely caught it. "A long time ago. Before." Before. He heard the word for what it was. It was the door slamming shut on her life. He looked at her hands, raw from the kitchen lie, now white-knuckled on the wood. "Horse sense ain't something you forget," he said quietly. "It just gets buried. You want to see if it's still there?" Terror flashed in her eyes. It was one thing to stand here, safe on the ground, to be on one, high and vulnerable. But then she looked at Molly. The mare turned her head and looked back at her. A calm, assessing gaze. It was a gaze without judgment. "I don't know if I can," she said. "Ain't asking you to," Wyatt said. He opened the corral gate. "Just asking you to say hello." He led the mare out, his movements slow, his voice a low rumble. "Easy, girl. Got someone here for you." He brought the horse to Lorna, who had taken 2 steps back, her hands pressed to her stomach. "She won't hurt you," Wyatt said. "She's just a horse. She don't know your story." Lorna forced her feet to stay planted. The mare was huge, a warm, breathing mountain of animal life. She smelled of hay and dust and something fundamentally clean. Molly stretched her neck and blew a soft, warm breath against Lorna's arm. Lorna gasped, a sharp intake of air. It was a feeling. It was warm. "See?" Wyatt said. He held out a stiff brush. "Horses like work. Makes them feel steady, just like people." Lorna looked at the brush, then at him. He was not telling her to ride. He was offering her a brush. Her hand, trembling, took it. She approached the mare's shoulder, her movements stiff with fear. "Easy," she whispered, her voice a reedy echo of Wyatt's. She touched the brush to the mare's dusty coat. The horse shifted, a simple movement of muscle, and Lorna nearly dropped the brush. "You're all right." Wyatt's voice came from the other side of the horse, calm and steady. "She's just settling. You're in charge of that brush. She knows it. Show her what you want." Lorna took a breath. She pressed the brush down and pulled. A long, firm stroke. Dust rose in the afternoon sun. The mare sighed, a low, contented sound, and leaned into the pressure. Lorna stopped. She looked at Wyatt. "She likes it," he said simply. A small, strange feeling flickered in Lorna's chest. It was not joy. It was not happiness. It was control. A simple, quiet control over this one small thing. She set her jaw and went back to work. She brushed the mare until her coat shone, her own fear slowly, stroke by stroke, giving way to the simple, physical rhythm of the work. The next day, he had the horse saddled. It was an old, worn saddle, the leather soft as cloth. "She's ready, if you are," he said. Lorna stared at the stirrup. It seemed a mile high. "I'll fall." "Maybe," he agreed. "And I'll be right here to help you up. Or you won't. Only one way to find out." He didn't offer to lift her. He didn't put his hands on her waist. He just held the horse's bridle and waited. He was making it her choice. He was giving her back the power. It took her 3 tries. Her body was weak, her limbs shaking. But finally, with a desperate, clumsy scramble, she was in the saddle. She sat high above him, her hands gripping the saddle horn so tightly her arms ached. She was terrified. She was exposed. She could see the entire prairie, the endless miles of it, and she was a target for all of it. "Easy," Wyatt said, his hand on the bridle. "Just breathe. You're just sitting. That's all. You've done the hard part." He did not let go. He walked the horse, leading her in a slow, tight circle around the yard, his steps matching the horse's. Lorna's eyes were squeezed shut. "Look at me, Lorna," he said. His voice was not a command. It was an invitation. She opened her eyes. He was looking up at her, his face calm, his gaze steady. "You ain't falling," he said. She loosened her grip on the horn. She felt the sway of the horse beneath her, the strong, steady rhythm of its walk. It was a rhythm she had forgotten she knew. They did that for an hour, just walking, Wyatt's hand never leaving the bridle. The next time, he gave her the reins. "She knows whoa, and she knows walk on," he said. "You tell her. She'll listen." Lorna held the strips of leather. They felt alien in her hands. She looked at Wyatt, who stepped back, away from the horse. He was letting her go. She sat there for a full minute, her heart pounding. Then she nudged the mare's ribs, very gently, with her heel. Molly took 1 step forward. Lorna was in control. She was moving. She nudged her again, and the mare walked forward, across the yard, toward the open gate. Lorna pulled back on the reins. Just a fraction. "Whoa," she whispered. The mare stopped. Lorna did it again. She walked. She stopped. She turned. She was doing it. She was doing it. She spent that afternoon in the corral, just walking and turning, relearning the feel of a living thing beneath her, one that responded to her, one that did not hurt her. When she finally slid to the ground, her legs were so weak she almost buckled. Wyatt was there, leaning on the fence. He didn't congratulate her. He just nodded, as if he'd expected it all along. "You look tired," he said, "but you don't look like a ghost." The town was a different matter. The town had eyes, and it had a memory. Lorna was healing, but she was healing in public. She had to go to Henderson's Mercantile for Mrs. Albright. It was the first time she had gone into the center of town alone since the incident at the inn. She walked with her head down, her shawl pulled tight, but she felt stronger. She had Molly's steady rhythm in her muscles. The store was warm, smelling of coffee beans, cured tobacco, and new bolts of calico. Mr. Henderson, a man whose kindness was written in the lines around his eyes, smiled at her. "Miss Lorna, good to see you in. What can I get for you?" She gave him her list. As he was measuring out flour, 2 women came in. They were saloon girls, their dresses a little too bright for the afternoon, their laughter a little too loud. One of them, Sadie, with hair the color of a new penny, saw Lorna by the counter. Sadie nudged her friend. "Well, look at that," she said, her voice carrying across the store. "It's the little shadow? Heard she's been spending time out at Wyatt's place." "Heard that too," the other one whispered back, a loud stage whisper. "Wonder what he's doing with a broken one like that. He deserves a whole woman, not that." "He's wasting his time," Sadie declared, picking up a tin of peaches. "Some things, once they're broke, they can't be fixed. Damaged goods." Lorna froze. Broken one, damaged goods. The words hit her like stones. All the strength she had felt, all the fragile control she had gained in the saddle, it all drained out of her, leaving her cold and empty. She was a ghost again, a thing to be whispered about, a stain. "Mr. Henderson came back, his face tight with anger. "Sadie, you take your business and your mouth elsewhere if you can't be civil." Sadie just laughed, a high, sharp sound. "Just telling the truth. Mr. Henderson, No harm in that. She tossed her coins on the counter and sashayed out, the bell on the door jangling mockingly. Lorna's hands were trembling so hard she couldn't pick up the sack of flour. Mister. Henderson gently put his own hand over hers. Don't you mind them, he said, his voice low and kind. Their hearts are smaller than a mustard seed. He busied himself bagging her things, then paused. Lorna, child, can I speak plain? She just nodded, unable to meet his eyes. He leaned in, his voice dropping. You came from back east, didn't you? Running from something? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Easy, child, he said. It's not my business, but I'm an old man. And I read the papers. I hear talk. A man like the one you ran from. A man with money and connections. He might not be the kind to let go easy. What? What have you heard? She whispered. Nothing specific, he said quickly, seeing the terror he had caused. Nothing at all, just a feeling. A man who would do what was done to you. He doesn't see you as a person. He sees you as property. Just, you be careful. Wyatt is a good man, but he's just one man. The fear was back, the cold, suffocating dread. The man she had fled was not a memory. He was a threat. He was a hunter, and she was the prey. She grabbed her parcels and fled the store, running back to the inn, back to the false safety of her attic room. That night, the sky turned to poison. A storm rolled in from the north, a massive, bruised-looking bank of clouds that swallowed the sunset. Lorna had been at Wyatt's cabin. He was teaching her to mend a bridle, the scent of leather and oil filling the small, warm room. The first crack of thunder was not a rumble. It was a crack, sharp and violent, as if the sky itself had split in two. Lorna dropped the leather. The awl clattered to the floor. It's just thunder, Wyatt said, looking up. Another crack. This one so close it shook the cabin. The windows rattled, and the wind began to scream. A high-pitched, tearing sound. It sounded like a woman's shriek. Lorna's breath hitched. She was not in the cabin. She was in the room, the white room. He was at the door. He was yelling. The door was splintering. Lorna? Wyatt's voice was distant. No, she whispered. Her hands flew to her ears. No, please, no! The storm was him. The violence, the noise, the lack of control. It was his rage, his fists, the sound of the door crashing open. Lorna, you're safe. He took a step toward her. Don't, she shrieked, scrambling backward, her eyes wide and unseeing. Don't touch me! She was not seeing him. She was seeing the other man. She scrambled for the door, threw it open, and ran out into the sudden, horizontal sting of the rain. The wind tore at her, nearly knocking her from her feet. She didn't run toward the inn. She ran toward the only other shelter, the barn. She burst through the barn doors and collapsed, sliding down the rough wood. The barn was huge and dark, the smell of hay and animals thick in the air. But it was not safe. The wind shrieked through the eaves. The thunder exploded overhead, one clap after another, and the rain hammered on the tin roof like 1,000 fists. She was trapped. She crawled, sobbing, into the deepest darkness, burrowing into a pile of clean hay in an empty stall, curling into a tight ball, her hands over her head. She was gone. The woman who had brushed the horse, the woman who had walked in the mercantile. She was gone. This was just the animal, the broken thing, waiting for the beating to end. Wyatt found her there. He had followed her, his lantern cutting a weak, yellow circle in the maelstrom. He saw her, a small, trembling mound in the straw. He did not call her name. He did not rush in. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that a man's touch now would be the worst kind of violence. She was not with him. She was somewhere far away, in a place he could not reach. So he simply entered the stall. He hung his lantern on a high peg, where its light was dim. He sat down on the hay, 5 feet away from her. He took off his wet hat and set it aside. Then, as the sky tore itself apart outside, he lay down. He did not speak. He did not touch her. He just lay on his back, his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze on the dark rafters overhead. Lorna cried. She wept until her throat was raw, her body shaking with each tremor of the storm. And every time she risked a glance, he was still there, a solid, unmoving shadow. He was not coming closer. He was not leaving. He was just staying. He was an anchor. He was proving, in the only way he could, that he would not hurt her. He was guarding her from the memory, just by being present. The storm raged for hours, and he did not move. Sometime before dawn, the storm passed. The hammering rain softened to a drip. The thunder rumbled away to the east. The only sounds were the shifting of the horses in their stalls and the ragged, exhausted sound of Lorna's breathing. She uncurled, slowly. Her body ached. She was cold, damp, and empty. She turned her head. He was still there. He had not slept. His eyes were open, his face grim in the gray pre-dawn light. She looked at him, this man who had lain on a barn floor all night, just to be near her. He had done nothing, and in doing nothing, he had done everything. "I feel," she whispered, her voice a dry croak, "like a ghost with skin." Wyatt turned his head, his gaze meeting hers. The anger in his eyes was not for her. It was for the man who had done this. "Then we'll bring you back to life," he said. His voice was rough with exhaustion, and with a promise that settled in her bones. They walked back to the cabin in the gray, wet dawn. The world smelled washed clean. He built up the fire, his movements stiff. He made coffee, strong and black. She stood by the fire, wrapped in a dry horse blanket, her hands shaking as she held the warm mug. He stood on the other side of the hearth, watching her. The exhaustion, the shared ordeal, the raw emotion of the night. It all hung between them, thick as the storm clouds had been. He put his mug down. He took one step, closing the distance. She did not flinch. She did not back away. She watched him come. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her mouth, then at her eyes. He was asking. She gave the smallest nod, a movement so slight it was barely there. He leaned in, slowly, giving her time to run. His hand came up, but he didn't touch her face. He touched her hair, his fingers gentle, and then he kissed her. It was not a rough kiss. It was hesitant. It was a question. It was just the pressure of his mouth, warm and firm, against hers, which was cold. Lorna's hands, of their own accord, came up. She clutched his shirt, her fingers twisting in the damp cotton. Her whole body was trembling. It was the first kiss of her life that was not a violation. It was the first kiss she had ever chosen. He felt her tremble. He felt the raw fear beneath the touch. He deepened the kiss, just slightly, a movement of profound, aching tenderness. He was trying to pour all the words he didn't have into that one touch. "You are safe. You are here. You are alive." Her knees buckled. He broke the kiss, his other hand coming up to grip her arm, holding her steady. She was breathless, her eyes wide, tears welling up and spilling over. It was too much. It was too real. "Wyatt," she whispered, her voice breaking. It was a plea. "Please, wait." He looked at her, at the raw panic in her eyes, the desperate need for safety that was warring with this new, fragile desire. He did not look angry. He did not look disappointed. He looked relieved, because she had trusted him enough to tell him no. He let go of her arm, stepped back, and put his own hands in his pockets, giving her the space she had asked for. "All right," he said, his voice thick. "I'll wait." His words hung in the air. "I'll wait." Waiting, for Wyatt, was a form of action. It was not a passive thing. It was a guard. It was a promise. And in the days that followed the storm, the waiting became a new kind of life. Lorna did not return to the inn, not fully. She still slept in her attic room, but her days were spent at his cabin. She told Mrs. Albright she was helping him break the horses, that she was earning her keep with him now. The old woman had simply nodded, her sharp eyes seeing the truth. "It's good land out there," she'd said. "Quiet." The quiet was what Lorna craved. The work was what she needed. She rose with him in the cold, pre-dawn gray. They would move in the comfortable silence of shared labor. She would light the stove and start the coffee while he went out to check the stock. When he came back in, his face red from the cold, she would have a plate of biscuits and gravy ready. It was a simple, domestic act. But for her, it was a revolution. She was not serving, she was sharing. She grew stronger. The kitchen pallor left her face, replaced by a healthy color from the wind and sun. The muscles in her arms and back, once weak and trembling, became defined. She could swing a feed sack from the wagon, her movements sure. She learned to brush the horses, her hands firm and knowing. The animals, who had at first been skittish around her, her fear a scent they could taste, now leaned into her touch. She had a gentle hand, Wyatt noted. She had a way with the difficult ones. The dun mare, Molly, was hers. She rode every day, striking out farther from the cabin, exploring the rolling brown hills and the shallow creek beds. She learned the land, the smell of the sage after a rain, the high, clear call of a red-tailed hawk. She was no longer a ghost. She was a presence. She was a woman who could sit a horse and mend a fence line. The fear was not gone. It was a scar, and like all scars, it ached when the weather turned. A loud, sudden noise would still make her jump. She still did not like to be in a crowded room, but the trembling had stopped. He, in turn, began to rely on her quiet presence, on the way she knew where he had left his good gloves, on the food she left simmering on the stove for him when he came in late. The cabin, once just a shelter, had become a home. They lived this way, balanced on the edge of the promise he had made. They were partners in everything but the one thing that hung, unspoken, between them. He did not kiss her again. He was careful, almost painfully so, not to crowd her. His touch was limited to a hand on her elbow to steady her, or his fingers brushing hers as he passed her a cup. But the awareness was a constant, low fire. One night, after a long, grueling day mending a corral fence that had been damaged by stray cattle, they sat at the small table, too tired to speak. The silence stretched, but it was heavy. Wyatt was not just tired. He was somewhere else, his gaze lost in the heart of the kerosene lamp. Lorna watched him. She knew this mood. It was the same one that came on him when he spoke of his brother. Amos, a bleak, hollowed-out quiet. "Wyatt," she said, her voice soft. He didn't look up, just traced the wood grain of the table with his thumb. "Today," he said, his voice flat. "It's the day. 3 years since I put him in the ground." Lorna's hand stilled in her lap. He was a fool," Wyatt said, the words rough, torn from him. "He was 18. He thought owning a rifle made him a man. He thought that piece of land was worth dying for. You couldn't have known," she whispered. "I did know," he said, his head snapping up, his eyes dark with a guilt she recognized. "I knew Hatcher was a hard man, and I knew Amos was all pride and no sense. I stood right there. I let them talk. I let them puff up. I should have knocked Amos out and dragged him home. I should have taken the rifle from him. I was his older brother. It was my job to keep him safe." He stood, unable to sit still, and walked to the cold fireplace, resting his arm on the mantel. He stared at the empty grate. "I see it, every night," he said, his voice low and raw. "I see him raise the gun. I see Hatcher's man fire. I see the surprise in his eyes." He hit the mantel with his fist, a single, dull thud of self-hatred. "I was right there, and I was too slow. I failed him. And for what? For a patch of dirt in a creek that runs dry every summer? I carry him, every day." He was carrying a ghost, just as she was. His was a ghost of guilt. Hers was a ghost of shame. Lorna stood up. She walked to him, her steps silent on the wooden floor. He did not turn. He was locked in his memory, a prisoner. She stood beside him, not touching, just sharing the space, a mirror of the night he had lain on the barn floor for her. He was shaking, a deep, contained tremor of grief and rage that he had held inside for 3 years. Lorna felt her own fear, the old, cold habit of it, A man's anger, his violence, even turned inward, was a danger. The girl she had been would have fled the cabin, but she was not that girl. Slowly, she raised her hand. It was no longer the trembling, raw-skinned hand of the kitchen. It was steady. It was strong. She did not touch his shoulder or his arm. She reached up and laid her palm flat against his cheek. He froze. The shock of her touch, so unexpected, so deliberate, broke him from his memory. He turned his head, his rough, unshaven skin grinding against her hand. His eyes were full of a pain so deep it stole her breath. She did not pull away. She held his gaze. "You carry too much," she whispered. It was the first time she had initiated a touch without fear. It was the first time she had offered comfort, instead of just receiving it. Wyatt's breath shuddered out of him. He closed his eyes, just for a second, and leaned into her hand. He did not cry. He did not speak. He just let her hold him, let her share the weight he had carried alone for so long. The barrier of his promise, the one he had made to wait, had been breached. Not by him, but by her. The intimacy that followed was not a storm. It was a tide. It was in the way he would now rest his hand on the small of her back as they passed in the narrow cabin. It was in the way she would mend his shirt while he sat nearby, reading, the two of them breathing the same quiet air. The desire was there. It was in every shared glance, every accidental touch, but he held back. He had promised to wait, and he would. He would wait until she was not just unafraid, but sure. The choice, when it came, was hers. It was a Saturday night. Weeks later, she had finished her work at the inn. The town was alive. The saloon piano tinny and loud, but she felt separate from it. She walked not to her attic room, but toward the light of Wyatt's cabin, a single yellow square in the vast darkness. She did not knock. She simply opened the door. He was at the table, oiling a bridle, the pieces laid out before him. He looked up, his hands still. He saw her face, her eyes. Something was different. She was not the girl who had come for help. She was a woman who had made a decision. In silence, she crossed the room and slid the heavy wooden bar into its bracket. The sound was loud in the small cabin. A thud that echoed the sound of the locks from her past. But this time, she was the one closing the door. She was locking the world out, not being locked in. She turned to him. She did not speak. Her fingers, steady, went to the top button of her plain wool dress. Wyatt stopped breathing. "Lorna," he said, his voice a rough protest. He started to stand, to stop her, to tell her she didn't have to. "I know," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She undid the next button. "This is not for you, Wyatt. It is for me." He sat back down, understanding. He watched her. His heart was hammering. She undid the buttons, one by one. Her gaze locked on his. She was not afraid. She was terrified, but she was doing it anyway. She was reclaiming the one thing that had been stolen from her. The dress gaped open. She pushed it from her shoulders, and it fell to the floor in a dark pool around her feet. She stood before him in her thin cotton chemise. For a moment, she faltered. The cold air hit her skin. The last defense. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick. "No," she said. "Not yet." She had to show him. She had to show him all of it. The truth. She turned, presenting her back to him, and pulled the chemise down, baring her shoulders and back. In the lamplight, he saw them. The scars. They were old, faded to a silvery white, but they were there. A long, thin line across her left shoulder blade. A cluster of smaller, crescent-shaped marks lower, near her waist. A map of cruelty. Wyatt made a sound. A low, choked sound of pain, and he was on his feet. She tensed, hearing him move, the old reflex screaming at her. Flinch, hide, brace. But he did not strike. He did not grab. His hands, when they touched her, were trembling. He did not touch the scars. He touched the unblemished skin of her shoulders, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone, as if he were memorizing her. He stepped closer, until his chest was flush against her bare back. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her, his face buried in her hair. She could feel the shudders that racked his body. He was shaking. "You're not ruined," he whispered, his voice broken. He was crying, a man who had buried his brother without a tear, and he was crying for her. She turned in his arms, her own tears blurring his face. She looked at this strong, quiet man, this man who had lain on a barn floor for her, who had waited, who had carried his own ghosts. "Neither are you," she whispered. He held her, just held her, for a long, long time. Then he lifted her as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to his bed. It was slow. It was emotional. It was, for her, a relearning of her own body. He kissed her face, her eyelids, her throat, her hands. He kissed the scars on her back, a gesture of reverence that healed her more than any words could. His touch was not a demand. It was a question, over and over. "Is this all right? Can I?" And she, in turn, touched him. She touched the hard, roped muscle of his arms, the rough stubble on his jaw. She was exploring. She was, for the first time, wanting. When they finally came together, it was overwhelming. It was a collision of two solitudes, two deep pains, two fragile hopes. It was a desperate, aching confirmation of life. She cried, a silent, streaming release of all the shame, all the fear. And he held her, his own tears wet in her hair, his movements a slow, deep promise. "I am here. You are safe. You are mine. And I am yours." She awoke the next morning to the sound of a bird outside the window. She was warm. She was tangled in the blankets, and in Wyatt's limbs. He was still asleep, his face peaceful in the gray light, his arm draped possessively over her waist. She lay still, cataloging her feelings. She was not a ghost. She was not numb. She was sore, and she was tired, and she felt a deep, profound calm. He stirred, his eyes opening. He looked at her, and the raw emotion of the night was still there. He brushed the hair from her face. "You all right?" he asked, his voice a low gravel. She thought for a moment. She thought of the man back east, of the locked room, of the feeling of being property. And she looked at the man beside her, who had just shared himself with her, and asked for nothing but what she was willing to give. "I forgot," she said, her voice full of a quiet wonder. "Just for a moment, I forgot everything." He knew what she meant. She had not forgotten the pain. She had forgotten the fear. He kissed her forehead. "That's a start," he said. "The trouble, as it always does, arrived on a Tuesday. It rode into town on a tired bay horse, a man wearing a dark city-cut duster and a flat-brimmed hat. He did not go to the saloon first. He went to the inn. Mrs. Albright was sweeping the porch. He dismounted, his movements economical, his eyes missing nothing. He was not a drifter. He was a professional. "Ma'am," he said, his voice polite, but with a flat, cold edge. "Looking for a room and some information. Rooms are 2 bits." "Mrs." Albright said, gripping her broom. "Information's free. If I have it." He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "I'm looking for a woman. Came west, maybe 5 months back. Dark hair, young, pretty, looks, scared, like a lost kitten. Answers to the name Lorna. Lorna Davies. Mrs." Albright's heart went cold. She kept her face impassive. "Don't know anyone by that name. Folks come and go." The man's gaze lingered on her. "She'd be running. She's unwell. Her family's worried. There's a reward." He named a sum, $500. That made her blink. "A lot of money for a lost kitten," she said dryly. "She's a very valuable kitten," he replied. He took a room, and then he went to the saloon, and then the mercantile. He was patient. He was asking questions. "Mrs." Albright did not wait. The moment Wyatt's wagon rumbled into town, she was on him, her face grim. She pulled him aside, away from the inn. "Wyatt, there's a man in town," she said, her voice low and urgent. "He's not a bounty hunter, not a legal one. He's private. He's asking for Lorna, by name." Wyatt's blood turned to ice. The world, which had just begun to feel warm, to feel right, tilted on its axis. He thought of Amos. He thought of Lorna's scars. "He's at the saloon," she said. Wyatt nodded, his face a mask of stone. "Thank you, Mrs. Albright." He did not load his supplies. He got back on his wagon and drove it hard, the horses confused by his uncharacteristic urgency. He burst into the cabin. Lorna was there, mending a shirt, a small, peaceful smile on her face. The smile died when she saw his. "Wyatt, what is it?" "He's here," he said, the words flat and hard. "A man, in town. He's asking for you, by name." The color drained from her face. The shirt fell from her hands. The old, cold terror, the one she had almost forgotten, seized her. She backed away, her hands flying to her mouth. "No, he found me!" Wyatt crossed the room, grabbing her arms. "Lorna, listen to me." He forced her to look at him. "You can run. I have money. More than enough. I can saddle Molly. You can be gone in 10 minutes. You can ride west. I'll point you to a pass. He'll never find you." He was offering her an escape. He was offering her the choice he had always promised her. She stared at him, her body shaking, her mind reeling. "Run again. Go back to the dust. Go back to being the ghost, the shadow, the running girl." She thought of the nights in ditches, the cold, the hunger, the loneliness. Then she looked around the cabin, at the bed she had woken in, at the fireplace they had shared, at the man who was offering to save her, even if it meant losing her. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The trembling did not stop. But she met his eyes. "No," she said, her voice shaking, but clear. "I'm tired of running." Her words. "I'm tired of running." Settled in the small cabin, extinguishing the panic, it was not a statement of surrender. It was a declaration of war. Wyatt looked at her, truly seeing the woman she had become. The fear was still in her eyes, a shadow in the deep water. But it was no longer her master. Her hands were not trembling. Her jaw was set. "All right," he said, his voice quiet. "We stand, but we do it smart." He went to his desk. He took out a piece of paper and a pencil. He thought for a long moment, then began to write. It was not a long note. He did not sign his name. He was asking about a man named Davies, from Philadelphia, and whether any legal warrants, state or federal, had been issued for a woman named Lorna. He was asking if the name Calloway was known to the marshal's service. He folded the paper and handed it to her. "Read it. Make sure it's right." She read it, then looked at him, confused. "Who is this for?" "An old friend," Wyatt said. "Marshal Elias Thorne, in Cheyenne. He's a good man. He'll find the truth." "But Cheyenne, that's 100 miles. "I know." He went to the door and pulled his rifle from the rack, checking the action. "We need to know what we're fighting. Is it the law, or is it just a man?" He left her in the barred cabin, taking the note. He did not ride to the telegraph office. That was too public, and Calloway would be watching. He rode to a small, run-down homestead on the edge of town, where a skinny boy of 15, named Ben, was mending a fence. Ben worshipped Wyatt. He had done odd jobs for him, and Wyatt had always treated him square. Wyatt gave the boy a $10 gold piece. "Ben," he said, his voice low and serious, "I need a ride done, fast. This note goes to Marshal Thorne in Cheyenne. It goes into his hand, no one else's. You don't sleep, you don't stop, and you don't talk to anyone. Can you do that?" The boy's eyes went wide, first at the money, then at the gravity in Wyatt's tone. "Yes, sir. Marshal Thorne. I know the building." "Good lad. There's another 10 when you get back." Wyatt watched him go, the boy riding his fast pony hard to the east. Before he turned his own horse back toward town. He had bought them 2, maybe 3 days. He collected Lorna. He would not leave her alone. They walked together, in the bright, cold daylight, to the sheriff's office. Lorna walked with her head high. She felt every eye on her from the saloon, from the mercantile. She could feel Calloway's gaze, a physical weight on her back. The sheriff's office was a small, dusty room that smelled of stale coffee and chewing tobacco. Sheriff Brody was a man in his 50s, with a heavy gut and a star pinned to a stained vest. He was polishing his spectacles when they entered. "Wyatt," he said, his voice amiable. "Miss Lorna, what can I do for you?" "There's a man in town," Wyatt said, his voice flat. He didn't sit. "Name's Calloway. He's staying at the inn. He's a bounty hunter." Sheriff Brody sighed, putting his spectacles on. He looked tired. "I know who he is. Wyatt. He's been asking questions. Seems polite enough. Buys his drinks. Pays his way." "He's hunting this woman," Wyatt said, gesturing to Lorna. "He's here to take her back east, against her will." Brody looked at Lorna. Her face was pale, but she met his gaze. "Miss," he said, "is there a warrant for you?" "No," Lorna said, her voice shaking but clear. "I broke no law. I am being pursued by a man I was forced to marry. This Calloway is his agent." Brody leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning. "I see. A private matter. Then a domestic dispute." "It's not a dispute," Wyatt said, his voice hardening. "It's a threat. I'm telling you, as a citizen, that her life is in danger. I want him run out of town." Sheriff Brody took a deep, weary breath. He looked at Wyatt as if explaining something to a child. "Son, let me tell you how this works. That man Calloway, I had a drink with him last night, just talking. He let it slip that there's a $500 reward for the young lady's safe return. $500. That's more than I make in a year." He spread his hands. "A man like that, he's backed by money from Philadelphia. He has resources, he has reach. You," he said, pointing at Wyatt, "you have a horse and a rifle. You don't have money, you don't have reach. So you won't help," Wyatt stated. It was not a question. "Help how?" Brody snapped, his patience gone. "He hasn't done anything. He hasn't broken a law. I can't arrest a man for speaking in a saloon. I can't run him out of town just because you don't like him. This is an orderly town. Wyatt, I aim to keep it that way. And men with that kind of money, they don't like being interfered with. My advice to you is to stay out of it. It's not your fight." "You're wrong," Wyatt said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "It is my fight, and you're telling me that in this town, the law only answers to the highest bidder." "I'm telling you to be smart," Brody said, turning back to his desk. "Go home, Wyatt. Let this sort itself out." They walked out into the street. The sun felt cold. They were alone. The town. The law. It was all just a thin veneer over the same old truth. Money and violence were the only things that mattered. "He's right," Lorna whispered, her face ashen. "He'll ruin you. He'll take everything you have." "He can try," Wyatt said. He took her arm. "We're going home, and we're going to wait." The waiting was the hardest part. They spent the next 2 days in the cabin, the door barred, the rifle always, leaning against the wall. Every gust of wind, every snap of a twig, made Lorna jump. Wyatt sat, mostly silent, cleaning his weapons, checking his supply of ammunition. He was preparing for a siege. Lorna felt a guilt so profound it was like a sickness. She was poisoning him. She was a plague, and she had brought her infection to the one clean place she had ever known. She watched him oiling the pistol, his hand steady, his face grim, and she hated herself. "You should let me go," she said, her voice dead. They were sitting by the fire, the second night. The moon was high, flooding the yard with silver light. "We've been over this," he said, not looking up. "No," she insisted, standing. "He's not after you. He's after me. If I go, he'll leave you be. You'll be safe. You can go back to your life." He stood then, his movement so fast it startled her. He grabbed her shoulders, not gently. "What life?" he demanded, his voice a raw whisper. "The one I had before, sitting in this room, counting the days, staring at the walls and thinking about my brother. That's not a life. Lorna, it's a wake." He shook her. "Just once. This," he said, his eyes burning into hers. This is the first thing that's mattered since Amos died. This is the first fight that's worth a damn. He's not just coming for you. He's coming for us. He's coming for my home, and I'll see him in hell before I let him take it." He let her go, his anger spent, leaving a raw, aching silence. The confrontation came later that night. Wyatt had known he would not come in daylight. He would not risk the town seeing. Wyatt was outside, doing a final check on the horses. The moon was so bright, the yard was almost like day. He had his pistol tucked into his belt. He was walking from the barn back to the cabin. "Wyatt!" The voice came from the shadows by the corral. Calloway. He stepped out, his dark duster blending with the night. He was 10 yards away. He was not holding a rifle. His hands were empty. At his sides, "Calloway," Wyatt said, stopping. He stood in the open, his hand nowhere near his gun. "I admire a man who stands his ground," Calloway said, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "But you're standing on the wrong ground. Friend, this doesn't concern you." "You're on my land," Wyatt replied. "That concerns me. I'm here for the girl," Calloway said. He took one step closer. "Mr. Davies is a very powerful man. He considers her his property. He's very particular about his property." "She's not property," Wyatt said. Calloway smiled, a thin, cold crescent in the moonlight. "That's where you're wrong. That's exactly what she is. And you're just a cowboy. You're a hired hand. You have no idea what you're interfering with." He reached into his duster, slowly, and pulled out a leather wallet. "Look, I'm a reasonable man. The sheriff told me you're poor. You're helping her. Maybe you think she'll be grateful. I'm authorized to offer you $100 for your trouble. You walk away. You let me take her. She won't be hurt, not badly." The insult, the casual brutality of the offer, made Wyatt's blood run cold. Inside the cabin, Lorna was at the window, her knuckles pressed to her mouth, watching the two dark figures. "You need to leave," Wyatt said, his voice flat. Calloway's smile faded. He sighed, putting his wallet away. "I was afraid of this, the noble type. You're going to get yourself killed over a broken, used-up girl. Well, I have my orders. Mr. Davies is, impatient." He paused, his hand still. "I'll tell you what, my orders are to bring her back, but my discretion is that if she can't be brought back, a receipt of her death is worth $250. There it was. The truth. He was not a retriever. He was an executioner. "You've chosen your side," Wyatt said. "I suppose I have." Calloway said. He drew. He was fast, faster than any man Wyatt had ever seen. A flash of metal in the moonlight. A gun exploded. The bullet tore through the air, a burning hornet. It caught Wyatt in his left side, a searing, white-hot line of pain that spun him half around. He stumbled, his hand clutching the new, wet hole in his shirt. He had not even flinched. He had known Calloway would draw. But as Calloway's gun came up, Wyatt was already moving. He did not dive. He did not roll. He drew his own gun, the one he had been cleaning all night. He fired twice. The shots were so close together they sounded almost like one. Calloway grunted, a sound of profound surprise. He looked down at his chest, where two dark, spreading stains appeared. He looked up at Wyatt, his expression not of anger, but of simple disbelief. He fell to his knees, and then, slowly, pitched forward onto his face in the dust. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the frantic whinny of the horses. Wyatt stood, his side on fire, his gun still smoking in his hand. The cabin door burst open. Lorna ran out, her feet bare, her face a mask of terror. She saw the man on the ground. Then she saw Wyatt, leaning heavily against the corral fence, his hand pressed to his side, the blood seaming through his fingers. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Wyatt!" She flew to him. You're hit. It's all right," he gritted, the pain making him dizzy. He chose." She tore his hand away. The blood was dark, welling up fast. "Inside," she commanded, her panic giving way to a fierce, desperate strength. She put her shoulder under his arm, taking his weight. She dragged him to the cabin, leaving the body where it lay. She got him to the bed, him collapsing onto it, groaning as his side screamed. "Whiskey," he gasped. "And the long knife in the kitchen." "No," she said. She was already tearing a strip from her cleanest petticoat. "The whiskey, yes, but not for drinking." Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. She ripped his shirt open. The wound was ugly, a deep, ragged tear in the flesh of his ribs. She cleaned it, her touch surprisingly gentle, using the whiskey to sear the wound. He hissed, his body arching off the bed, but he did not cry out. She worked, her tears falling hot onto his skin, mixing with the blood and the whiskey. She packed the wound as best she could and bound it tight, so tight he gasped for breath. It's clean," she sobbed. "Her task done. I think the bullet went through. It's just flesh." "Wyatt." She collapsed on the bed beside him, her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she wept, her shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry. I brought this. I didn't want this. I didn't want to hurt anyone else." He lay there, breathing in shallow, painful gasps. The fire in his side was a dull, heavy roar. He reached out, his hand weak, and gripped her arm. "Lorna," he said. He waited until she looked at him, her face stained with tears. "You didn't. He chose. He came to my home. He drew on me. He chose his side." He took a painful breath. This is just the cost." He closed his eyes, the blood loss making the room spin. We have to go, before dawn. Brody, he'll come. He'll side with the money." "A dead man. It's a hanging." "Go, where?" she said. Panic rising again. "You can't ride." "I can," he said, his voice a steel thread. "Help me up. We go to the mountains, the old line cabin. No one will find us there. Pack food, ammunition." It took them an hour. She was the strong one. She dressed him, her hands gentle. She saddled Molly in his own tall gelding. She loaded saddlebags with jerky, coffee, flour, and every box of cartridges she could find. She tied a bedroll and blankets behind each saddle. She left the body in the yard. There was no time for anything else. He pulled himself into the saddle, his face white, a low sound of agony escaping his lips. Lorna mounted Molly, her rifle in the scabbard. They rode out, not toward the town, but north, toward the high, dark spine of the mountains. The journey was a nightmare. They rode for 2 days, Wyatt swaying in the saddle, half conscious, Lorna forcing him to stay upright. They left the rolling prairie behind and entered the high country. The air grew thin and cold. They followed game trails, pushing up through thick pine forests, their way blocked by sheer cliffs of gray granite. The world was vertical, silent, and wild. On the evening of the second day, they found it. A small, crude cabin, built of logs, its roof covered in sod, nestled in a high meadow, invisible from below. A cold, fast river rushed by, the sound a constant roar. Lorna got him inside. The cabin was one room, with a stone fireplace, a broken table, and 2 rough bunks. It was damp and smelled of pack rats, but it was safe. She built a fire. She laid him down on a bunk, covering him with every blanket they had. He was feverish, the wound angry and red. For 3 days, he did not know where he was. Lorna tended him. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. She cleaned his wound. She forced sips of broth, made from a rabbit she caught in a snare, between his lips. She went out with his rifle, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, and sat until a young deer came to the river. Her shot was true. She butchered the animal, her hands covered in blood, her mind cold and focused. She was keeping them alive. At night, she would sit by the fire, listening to his ragged breathing, and to the other sounds, the high, lonely cry of a wolf, echoing off the cliffs, the roar of the river. It was a wild, primal world. It stripped everything away, leaving only the essentials: fire, water, food, and the man breathing in the dark. On the 4th day, his fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear. He saw her, asleep in the chair, his rifle across her lap. Her face was thin, exhaustion carved into it. But it was strong. He watched her for a long time. He had fought for her. She had saved his life. The bond was no longer a fragile thing. It was a cord, forged in blood and fire. In the days that followed, he healed. He sat, watching her. He watched her skin fish from the icy river, her hands quick and sure. He watched her chop wood, her swing strong. He saw the woman she had been born to be, the one the world had tried to break. The wilderness had not broken her. It had revealed her. One night, the cold was so deep it bit through the cabin walls. The fire was the only light, the only warmth. The wolf called again, closer this time. Wyatt stood. His side was a dull ache, but his strength was back. He walked to her, where she sat staring into the flames. He took her hand and pulled her to her feet. He did not kiss her tentatively. He kissed her with a raw, desperate urgency. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a kiss of possession. It was primal. He was a man claiming his mate, his equal, the one who had fought for him. She met his kiss, her own need as fierce as his. This was not the gentle healing of their first time. This was a fire. This was a claim. They were the only two people in this wild, unforgiving world. They made love on the furs in front of the fire, a desperate, trusting tangle of limbs. It was not slow. It was a confirmation of life, a defiance of the death that had come so close. It was a fire against the cold, a claim made in the heart of the wilderness. Afterward, they lay in the tangled blankets, the firelight playing over their skin. The wolf howled again, and Lorna shivered, though not from cold. She was tracing the angry, new scar on his side, a companion to the faded silver ones on her own back. They were a matched set. "I want to belong to you," she whispered, the words so quiet he almost didn't hear them over the wind. He tensed, looking down at her. She met his gaze, her eyes clear and trusting in the firelight. She, who had been treated as property, who had run from the very idea of belonging. "If that's allowed," she finished. Wyatt held her, his hand tangled in her hair, the scent of the pine smoke and her skin filling his senses. He looked at her words. "If that's allowed," as if they were a physical thing, a final, painful shackle he needed to break. "Allowed?" he said, his voice rough. He pulled back just enough to see her face in the firelight. "Lorna, belonging is not, it's not a chain, it's not a locked door, it's not one person owning another." He touched the scar on her shoulder, his fingers gentle. "This," he said, his voice thick with an anger that was not for her. "This is what that bastard called belonging. This is ownership." He then moved his hand, lacing his fingers with hers, pressing their palms together. "What we have," he said, "is two people standing on the same piece of ground, facing the same way. That's belonging. And you don't ever have to ask if it's allowed." She searched his eyes, and for the first time, the last shadow of the man back east, the fear of the cage, finally dissolved. She was not his property. She was his partner. They stayed in the high meadow for 2 more weeks. Wyatt's side healed, the flesh knitting together, leaving a raw, puckered scar that matched his name. Lorna's strength, the one she had discovered in herself, settled in, becoming not a desperate survival tactic, but a quiet, steady confidence. They hunted together. They fished. They sat by the fire, talking for hours, filling in the empty spaces of their pasts, no longer with the raw pain of confession, but with the calm of a story told and finished. One afternoon, a rider appeared at the tree line. Wyatt was on his feet in an instant, his rifle in his hand. Lorna was beside him, not cowering, but holding the axe from the woodpile, her stance solid. The rider was old, with a long gray duster and a wide-brimmed hat. He sat his horse easily, his hands in plain sight. He was not Calloway. He was not a threat. He was just a man. He rode forward slowly. "That's a fine view," the man called out, his voice a dry, prairie rasp. "Shame to spoil it with gunfire. You Wyatt?" "I am," Wyatt said, his rifle steady. "Took me damn near a week to find this place." "You've got a good memory for high country." The man stopped his horse 20 yards away. "My name is Elias Thorne. I'm a U.S. Marshal. I got a note delivered by a very winded young man. About 2 weeks back." Wyatt lowered the rifle, relief and confusion warring on his face. "Thorne, it's been a long time." "It has," the marshal said. He dismounted, his joints creaking, and walked forward. He nodded to Lorna, his eyes respectful. "Ma'am, I reckon you're the reason for all this." He turned to Wyatt. "The boy, Ben, he found me. He also told me about the fellow Calloway, and about you and the lady disappearing. I figured I'd let you heal before I came hunting." "What's the word?" Wyatt asked. The question tight. "The word," Thorne said, "is good. I wired a friend in the Pinkerton office, this Calloway. He was one of theirs, but he was working private on this one. Off the books, taking a personal contract for a man named Davies in Philadelphia." "So it was private?" Lorna whispered, her hand on her throat. "Purely," Thorne confirmed. "I checked the federal dockets. I checked the state ones. There is no warrant for you, miss. No bounty, no legal claim. You haven't broken a single law. This Davies, he's rich, and he's got a long reach back east. But out here, he's just a man who hired a thug to do his dirty work. A thug who drew on the wrong man, on his own property." Wyatt looked at the ground. "Brody, the sheriff, he won't see it that way. He'll see a dead man with rich friends." Thorne spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Brody's a paid man. He's always served the man with the heaviest purse. But he's a town sheriff. I'm a federal marshal." He looked at Wyatt, a small, grim smile on his face. "My report will say that Calloway was a known instigator, that he threatened a private citizen on his own land, and that you acted in self-defense. Brody will choke on it, but he'll sign it. The case is closed." Lorna felt a lightness in her chest, as if a stone she had been carrying for a year had just been lifted. "Closed." "But it ain't finished," Thorne said, his voice turning serious. "This Davies, he's not the type to give up. He lost his $500 man. He'll just send a $1,000 one, or he'll come himself." The cold returned to Lorna's veins. "Then we have to run, again." "No," Thorne said. "You're done running. That's why I'm here. We're going to fight him with the law. Just not Brody's law." He looked at Wyatt. "We're riding to Cheyenne. It's a bigger town. With a federal court, we're going to file a peace bond, an injunction. We'll get your testimony, ma'am, about the kidnapping, the beatings. We'll make it a public record. We'll get a federal judge to sign an order that says if Davies, or any man in his employ, comes within 100 yards of you, he'll be clapped in irons. We'll make it a criminal matter. We'll use his love of his good name against him. It was a plan, a real plan. Not running, not hiding, fighting." "When?" Wyatt asked. "Now," Thorne said. "Pack your gear. This mountain air is hell on my knees." The ride back to town was not a flight. It was a procession. Marshal Thorne rode in front, his federal star gleaming on his chest. Wyatt and Lorna rode side by side, on Molly and the tall gelding. They were not the ghosts who had fled in the night. They were survivors. When they hit the main street, the town stopped. People came out of the mercantile, out of the saloon. Sheriff Brody stormed out of his office, his face purple. He saw Calloway's bay horse, its reins tied to Thorne's saddle, and his face got darker. "Thorne!" he bellowed. "What's the meaning of this? That's Wyatt. He killed a man. I was coming for him." Thorne didn't even stop his horse. He just looked down at the sheriff from the saddle. "Hello, Brody. Nice to see you, too." He gestured back at Wyatt. He was on his own land. It was self-defense. My report's already written. You'll get a copy. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have federal business in Cheyenne." He kept riding, leaving Brody sputtering in the dust. The whispers followed them. The saloon girls, Sadie and the others, stood on the boardwalk, their arms crossed. Sadie saw Lorna. She saw the buckskin pants Lorna was wearing, borrowed from Wyatt. She saw the rifle in her scabbard. She saw the way she met her gaze. Not with fear, but with a cold, clear calm. Sadie looked away first. They stopped at Wyatt's cabin. The door was off its hinges. Inside, the place was a ruin. Whoever had come looking for them, Brody's men or allies of Calloway, had been thorough. They had torn the mattress open, smashed the table, thrown the flour and coffee all over the floor. It was an act of pure, petty spite. Lorna stood in the doorway, her heart sinking. This was the home she had found. This was the place she had been safe. And she had brought this ruin. Wyatt stood behind her. He looked at the mess for a long, silent minute. He looked at the broken chair, the scattered ashes. "It's just wood," he said, his voice quiet. Lorna turned to him. "It was our home." "No," he said. He took her arm, pulling her away from the doorway, back into the clean, open air. "It was just a place, a shelter." He looked west, past the town, toward the rolling hills that drank the afternoon sun. "I know a piece of land," he said, his voice soft. "About 5 miles west. The creek there, it never runs dry. There's a valley, flat and green, with good pasture, big cottonwoods for shade. I used to ride out there. With Amos. We talked about building there. A real ranch." He turned to her, his gaze steady, his hand still on her arm. "This," he said, gesturing to the broken cabin, this was the past. That's the future. When we get back from Cheyenne, will you build it with me, Lorna?" She looked at his face, at the quiet hope in his eyes. She looked at the man who had laid on a barn floor for her, who had taken a bullet for her, who had shared his deepest grief with her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Wyatt, I'll build it with you." The trip to Cheyenne took 3 days. The legal battle took 2 more. Marshal Thorne was true to his word. He brought them before a federal judge, a stern, white-bearded man who listened to Lorna's story in stunned, outraged silence. He had heard of Davies. He was a man who had tried to use his money to influence territorial appointments. The judge signed the injunction with a grim satisfaction. He made it federal. He made it ironclad. They rode back to town. The paper, the proof of her freedom, folded safely in Lorna's shirt. As they entered the main street, a fine, black carriage stood in front of the inn. It was impossibly clean, impossibly out of place. It was a piece of Philadelphia, dropped into the dust. A man was standing on the boardwalk, arguing with Sheriff Brody. He was in his 40s, handsome with a tailored suit and a cold, commanding presence. He was the man from her nightmares. Mr. Davies. He saw her. His argument with Brody stopped. A cold, polite smile spread across his face. He looked at her, then at Wyatt, as if he were looking at a stray dog she had picked up. "Lorna, my dear," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "This foolishness has gone on long enough. You have caused a great deal of trouble. Mr. Calloway is missing, and I have to clean up his mess. You will come home, now." He said it with the absolute, unshakable confidence of a man who had never been told no. He expected her to crumble. He expected her to obey. Wyatt's hand went to his gun, the new one he had bought in Cheyenne. But before he could draw, Lorna put her hand on his chest. Stopping him, she slid off Molly's back. She stood on her own feet. She was not the trembling, starved creature who had arrived in town. She was dressed in buckskin. Her hair was braided back, practical and strong. Her face was brown from the sun. She looked whole. She walked forward, stopping 10 feet from him. "I am not your dear," she said, her voice not loud, but it cut through the street's silence. Davies' smile faltered. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and did not recognize the woman she had become. "Lorna, do not be dramatic. You are overwrought. You will come with me." "No," she said. "I am your fiancé," he hissed, his civility cracking. "Your father gave you to me. You are mine." "I am not going home," Lorna said, her voice clear and cold. "And I am not yours." She took a step closer, and it was he who flinched. "You don't own me," she said. "I do." Davies's face contorted, the handsome mask slipping, revealing the raw, furious entitlement beneath. "You ungrateful." He raised his hand, the same hand that had struck her, the same hand that had locked her in. "I bought you. You are my property." He lunged for her. He did not make it 2 steps. "I wouldn't," a new voice drawled. Marshal Thorne stepped out of the inn, a cup of coffee in one hand. His other hand rested on his pistol. "Mr. Davies, I presume. I'm Marshal Elias Thorne. And this," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket, "is a federal restraining order. It says you are to remain 100 yards from this woman at all times. It says you are to cease all pursuit. It says if you so much as speak to her again, I will personally arrest you for harassment, intimidation, and assault." Davies froze. He looked at Thorne, at the star, at the cold, impartial gaze. He was a man who understood power, and his power, the power of money and social pressure, had just met a wall. "This is an outrage," he blustered. "A family matter." It's a federal matter now," Thorne said, taking a sip of his coffee. "And I'll be sending a wire to my colleagues back east, informing them of your methods, informing them that your agent, Mr. Calloway, was killed while attempting to execute a private, illegal contract. I imagine your political friends in Washington won't appreciate the scandal. A man who beats women and hires killers. It's a bad look, even in Philadelphia." Davies's face was murderous. He was beaten. His reputation, the only thing he truly cared about, was on the line. He looked at Lorna, his eyes promising a future revenge he could no longer deliver. He looked at Wyatt, his gaze filled with pure hatred. Without a word, he turned, climbed into his fine carriage, and slammed the door. He shouted at his driver, and the carriage wheeled around, stirring up a cloud of dust as it fled, back toward the east, where he belonged. Lorna watched it go until it was just a speck. She let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for her entire life. She turned. Wyatt was there. He had not moved. He was just watching her, his face full of a pride so fierce it made her heart ache. She walked to him, and he put his arm around her, pulling her close. The town was silent, watching them. "Let's go home," he said. They did not go back to the cabin. They went to the mercantile. They bought supplies, a new axe, a sack of flour, coffee, and a small cast-iron skillet. They packed what little they had left from the ruined cabin, and they rode west, out of the town, away from the stares and the whispers. They rode for an hour, the setting sun at their backs. They left the dusty, flat prairie and entered the rolling hills, just as Wyatt had said. They found it, a small valley, green and quiet, sheltered from the wind. A creek, cold and clear, ran through the middle, shaded by 3 enormous cottonwood trees. They dismounted. The only sound was the rush of the water and the call of a hawk. High above, this land was clean. It held no ghosts. They unsaddled the horses, letting them drink from the creek. Together, they pitched a small canvas tent near the bank. Wyatt built a fire as the sun began to dip. A violent, beautiful spectacle of blood orange and deep purple. They sat by the fire, sharing a plate of biscuits, watching the sky change. The air grew cold, but the fire was warm. Lorna leaned against Wyatt's side, his arm solid around her. She was not the woman who had arrived in dust and rags. He was not the man who had been hollowed out by guilt. They were 2 new people, in a new place. "I don't want to forget anymore," she said, her voice quiet, almost lost in the sound of the creek. He looked down at her, his hand finding hers. "What's that?" She looked up at him, her eyes clear, reflecting the new, bright stars. "When I first came here, all I wanted was to forget. To forget everything that had happened. Everything I was—" She paused, turning her gaze to the fire. "But now, I don't want to forget, not the fog, not the storm, not even Calloway. And I don't want to forget this." She held his hand, the one that had held a gun for her, the one that had healed her. I want to remember this." Wyatt kissed her, softly, a kiss that held no memory of pain, no shadow of the past. It was a kiss of promise. "Then let's make memories worth keeping," he replied. "Thank you so much for listening to our story. We truly hope you enjoyed this journey. We would love to hear where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this, and please share your thoughts with us in English. We appreciate every one of you.